The morning I opened my mailbox to find a bright orange notice from the homeowners association, I knew my day was about to get worse. I stood there in my driveway in Kearney, Nebraska, reading the letter 3 times because I could not believe what I was seeing. The Meadowbrook Hills HOA, led by their president Brenda Morrison, was fining me $500 for having a salt brine sprayer attached to my truck. I had lived in this development for 6 years, and during that time, I had watched the HOA nitpick every single resident for the most ridiculous violations imaginable. Last year, they fined my neighbor for having a garden gnome that was supposedly too large. The year before that, they went after someone for parking their perfectly normal sedan on the street overnight. But this was absurd even by their standards. My name is Grant Ellsworth, and I run a private snow removal business. The salt brine sprayer on my truck was not some eyesore. It was a professional piece of equipment that I used to pretreat roads and driveways before winter storms hit. The thing was sleek, well-maintained, and frankly, it looked like it belonged on a commercial vehicle because that is exactly what it was. My truck was parked in my own driveway, not blocking anyone, not leaking fluids, not doing anything except existing. I walked back inside my house, the letter crumpled in my fist. My golden retriever, Max, looked up at me from his bed in the living room, sensing my frustration. I grabbed my phone and called the HOA office number listed at the bottom of the violation notice. The phone rang 4 times before someone picked up. Meadowbrook Hills HOA, this is Cheryl speaking. Hi, Cheryl. This is Grant Ellsworth on Pinecrest Drive. I just received a violation notice about my truck, and I need to speak with someone about this immediately. There was a pause, then the sound of papers shuffling. Oh yes, Mr. Ellsworth, I see the note here. The board determined that your vehicle with the commercial equipment violates Section 7.3 of the Community Covenants regarding commercial vehicles in residential driveways. That is ridiculous, I said, trying to keep my voice level. I have read the covenants. That section refers to semi-trucks, box trucks, and vehicles over a certain weight class. My truck is a standard F250. People have those all over this neighborhood. Yes, but your truck has commercial equipment attached to it, Cheryl replied in a tone that suggested she had been coached on exactly what to say. The board believes this creates an unsightly appearance that affects property values. Property values? Are you serious right now? Half the neighborhood has boats and RVs parked in their driveways, and nobody says anything about those. Those are recreational vehicles, Mr. Ellsworth. There is a difference. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I would like to appeal this to the board. What is the process? You can submit a written appeal, and it will be reviewed at the next board meeting on the 15th of next month. That is 3 weeks away. What am I supposed to do with my truck in the meantime? The fine will continue to accrue at $50 per day until the violation is corrected, Cheryl said, and I could hear the discomfort in her voice. She was just the messenger, but the message was infuriating. That is insane. You are telling me I could owe thousands of dollars by the time they even look at my appeal. Those are the rules, Mr. Ellsworth. I am sorry. I hung up before I said something I would regret. The HOA had always been aggressive, but this felt personal. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the Community Covenants document I had saved when I first moved in. I spent the next 2 hours reading through every single line of the regulations, looking for anything that could support their claim. Section 7.3 was clear. It prohibited commercial vehicles over 10,000 pounds from being parked in driveways overnight. My truck, even with the sprayer attached, came in well under that limit. There was no mention anywhere in the document about commercial equipment being prohibited on standard pickup trucks. They were either interpreting the rules in bad faith or making up new ones as they went along. The next day, I decided to attend one of the HOA board meetings. They were held every 2 weeks in the community center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that also served as a gym and gathering space for residents. I showed up 15 minutes early and took a seat in the back row of folding chairs that had been set up in the main room. Brenda Morrison walked in precisely at 7 in the evening, followed by 3 other board members. Brenda was exactly what you would picture when someone says the word Karen. She was in her late 40s, with blonde hair cut in a sharp bob, and she carried herself with an air of authority that seemed completely disproportionate to her actual position as the president of a suburban HOA. She wore a blazer and slacks like she was running a Fortune 500 company instead of hassling people about their mailbox colors. "Good evening, everyone," Brenda said, taking her seat at the table in the front of the room. "Thank you for attending tonight's meeting. We have several items on the agenda." I waded through 20 minutes of mundane discussions about landscaping contracts and pool maintenance before I raised my hand. Brenda looked at me with thinly veiled annoyance. "Yes, Mr. Ellsworth. Did you have a question?" "I have a concern about the violation notice I received," I said, standing up. "I was fined for having a salt brine sprayer on my truck, but I do not believe this violates any actual covenant in our community rules. The board has determined that commercial equipment on vehicles constitutes a violation of our standards regarding commercial vehicles," Brenda replied without missing a beat. "But the covenant specifically refers to vehicle weight, not equipment," I said, holding up a printed copy of Section 7.3. "My truck is well under the weight limit." One of the other board members, a man named Richard who I recognized from the neighborhood, leaned forward. "The spirit of the rule is to maintain a residential appearance. Your truck looks like a construction vehicle." "It is a snow removal vehicle," I countered. "I run a legitimate business that serves this community, among others. Several people in this room have probably hired me at some point." "That is beside the point," Brenda interjected. "The board has made its decision. You can file a formal appeal, but until then, the fines will continue to accrue." "This is absurd," I said, feeling my frustration boiling over. "You are essentially trying to put me out of business because you do not like how my truck looks." "We are trying to maintain property values," Brenda said coldly. "If you do not like our rules, perhaps you should consider living somewhere else." The room fell silent. A few other residents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I realized then that arguing further was pointless. The board had already made up their minds, and they were not interested in logic or fairness. I left the meeting and drove straight to a lawyer's office the next morning. His name was Tom Martinez, and he specialized in HOA disputes. After explaining my situation, he leaned back in his chair and shook his head. "Unfortunately, HOAs have a lot of leeway in how they interpret their covenants," Tom said. "Even if you are technically right, fighting them in court can be expensive and time-consuming. You are looking at thousands in legal fees, and there is no guarantee you will win." "So what am I supposed to do?" I asked. "You could remove the sprayer from your truck when you are not using it," Tom suggested, "or you could park the truck off-site somewhere." "I need the sprayer on my truck. Winter is coming, and I have contracts to fulfill, and paying for off-site parking would cost me more than I can afford right now." Tom nodded sympathetically. "Then your best bet is to file the appeal and hope the board sees reason. In the meantime, document everything. Take photos, Keep copies of all correspondence and make sure you have proof that your truck complies with the actual written covenants. I left Tom's office feeling defeated. The HOA had me backed into a corner and they knew it. For the next 2 weeks, I parked my truck in my driveway every night, and every day, another $50 fine appeared in my mailbox. By the time the board meeting rolled around, I owed the HOA over $700 in fines. The appeal hearing was a joke. Brenda and the board members sat at their table, stone-faced, while I presented my case. I brought printed copies of the covenants, photos of my truck, and even a letter from my insurance company confirming that my vehicle was classified as a standard pickup, not a commercial truck. "Your evidence is noted," Brenda said when I finished. "The board will deliberate and provide you with a decision within 5 business days." I knew what the decision would be before I even walked out of the room. Sure enough, 3 days later, I received a letter upholding the original violation and informing me that my fines now totaled nearly $1,000. That night, I sat in my living room with Max curled up beside me, staring at the letter and wondering if I should just give up. Maybe I could rent a storage unit for my truck, or maybe I could park it at a friend's place outside the neighborhood. But every solution felt like letting the HOA bully me into submission. Then, in early November, everything changed. I woke up one morning to find an email from the Nebraska Department of Transportation in my inbox. The subject line read, "Notice of Road Closure, County Road 428. I opened it, curious, and started reading. County Road 428 was the main road that connected Meadowbrook Hills to the rest of Kearney. It was the only direct route in and out of our neighborhood. According to the email, the state had determined that the road was in severe disrepair and posed a safety hazard. Effective December 1st, the road would be closed for a complete reconstruction project that was expected to last until late February. During the closure, residents would have to use an alternate route that added nearly 20 miles to the trip into town. The detour looped around through rural farmland and included several unpaved roads that were not maintained during the winter. I read the email twice, and then a slow realization dawned on me. The state was closing the main road right before winter, and the alternate route was going to be a nightmare once the snow started falling. Those unpaved roads would become impassable without proper treatment. I started getting phone calls later that day. Several of my clients lived in Meadowbrook Hills, and they had received the same email. They were panicking about how they would get to work, how they would get their kids to school, and how they would handle emergencies if the detour became unusable. "Grant, is there anything you can do?" One of my clients, a woman named Laura, asked over the phone. "I heard that the county is not going to treat those back roads. They said it is not in their budget." "I can treat them," I said, "but it is going to take a lot of work. Those roads are long and they will need regular applications throughout the winter." "Can you do it for the whole neighborhood?" Laura asked. "I am sure people would be willing to chip in." I thought about it. Treating those roads would require my truck, my sprayer, and a significant amount of time and resources. But if I could line up enough clients, it might be worth it. And there was a certain poetic justice to the idea of the HOA needing my help after they had spent weeks fining me for having the exact equipment that could solve this problem. Over the next few days, I reached out to other residents and started putting together a proposal. I would treat the detour roads twice a week throughout the winter, ensuring they remained passable. In exchange, residents would pay a monthly fee that would cover my costs and give me a reasonable profit. The response was overwhelming. Within a week, I had signed contracts with nearly 60 households in Meadowbrook Hills. People were desperate for a solution, and I was the only person in the area with the equipment and expertise to provide it. Then, on a cold Monday afternoon in mid-November, I got a knock on my door. I opened it to find Brenda Morrison standing on my porch, her expression strained. "Mr. Ellsworth," she said, forcing a smile. "Do you have a moment to talk?" I leaned against the door frame, crossing my arms. "What can I do for you, Brenda?" "I wanted to discuss the road closure situation," she said. "As you know, this is going to be a significant inconvenience for everyone in the neighborhood." "I am aware," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "The board has been exploring options for dealing with the detour, and we understand that you have been offering a snow treatment service," Brenda continued. "We were wondering if you might be willing to work with the HOA to provide this service for the entire community." I almost laughed. "You mean the same HOA that has been fining me for having the equipment I need to provide that service?" Brenda's smile faltered. "I understand there has been some tension, but this is a matter of community safety. We need to put our differences aside and work together." "You fined me over $1,000, Brenda. You told me my truck was an eyesore and that I should move if I did not like your rules. Now you are asking for my help. The fines can be waived," Brenda said quickly. "We can revisit the violation and come to a resolution that works for everyone." "That is not good enough," I said. "You spent weeks making my life miserable over something that was never a real violation. You ignored the actual covenants and made up rules to suit your agenda. Why would I trust you now?" Brenda's expression hardened. "I am trying to be reasonable here, Mr. Ellsworth. This is bigger than your personal grievances. There are families in this neighborhood who need access to safe roads. And I am already helping those families," I said. "I have contracts with dozens of households. If the HOA wants my help, you can sign a contract like everyone else." "That is not how this works," Brenda said, her voice rising. "The HOA represents the community. We should not have to negotiate with individual residents for essential services." "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you tried to drive me out of the neighborhood," I said. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have work to do." I closed the door before Brenda could respond. Through the window, I watched her walk back to her car, her face flushed with anger. I felt a small sense of satisfaction, but I also knew this was not over. The next day, I received another letter from the HOA. This one informed me that my previous fines had been forgiven as a gesture of goodwill, and that the board was inviting me to a special meeting to discuss a partnership for winter road maintenance. I called Tom Martinez and asked him to review the letter. He read it over the phone and then gave a low whistle. "They are panicking," he said. "This is a complete 180 from their previous position." "Should I go to the meeting?" I asked. "That is up to you," Tom said, "but if you do, make sure you have everything in writing. Do not agree to anything verbally. And honestly, Grant, you hold all the cards here. They need you more than you need them." The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. I showed up with a folder full of documents, including my contracts with other residents, a detailed breakdown of my costs, and a proposed agreement that outlined exactly what I would provide and what I expected in return. Brenda and the board members were already seated when I arrived. The room was empty except for us, which told me this was not a public meeting. They wanted to handle this quietly. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Ellsworth," Brenda said, her tone overly polite. "We appreciate your willingness to discuss this matter." "Let us cut to the chase," I said, taking a seat across from them. "You need my services and I am willing to provide them, but only under specific terms." Richard, the board member who had argued against me at the previous meeting, frowned. "We were hoping we could come to a mutual agreement without formal contracts. This is a community effort after all." "Everything I do is under contract," I said. "That is how I protect myself and my clients. If you want my help, we will do this properly." Brenda glanced at the other board members, then nodded. "Fine. What are your terms?" I slid a copy of my proposal across the table. "I will treat the detour roads twice a week from December 1st through February 28th. I will use commercial-grade salt brine, and I will prioritize the routes based on weather conditions. In exchange, the HOA will pay me a flat fee of $15,000, payable in 3 monthly installments." Richard's eyes widened. $15,000. That is outrageous. "That is the cost of doing business," I said. "I am not a charity. I have expenses and I am taking on a significant amount of risk by committing to this project. If you do not like my price, you are free to find someone else." Brenda leaned forward, her jaw tight. "You know there is no one else. You are the only person with the equipment to handle this." "Then I guess you will have to decide if my price is worth it," I said. The room fell silent. The board members exchanged glances, and I could see the frustration on their faces. They were not used to being in this position. For years, they had wielded power over the residents of Meadowbrook Hills, dictating everything from paint colors to parking rules. Now they were the ones who needed something, and they hated it. Finally, Brenda spoke. "We will need to discuss this with the full board and put it to a vote. Can you give us a few days?" "You have until Monday," I said. "After that, I am moving forward with my existing contracts, and the HOA will have to figure out another solution." I left the meeting feeling more confident than I had in weeks. The tables had turned, and the HOA was scrambling. I knew they would eventually agree to my terms because they had no other choice. That weekend, I ran into Laura at the grocery store. She was one of the residents who had already signed a contract with me, and she looked relieved when she saw me. "Grant, thank goodness," she said, waving me over. "I heard Brenda has been trying to negotiate with you. Please tell me you are not going to back out on us." "I am not backing out," I assured her. "My contracts with individual residents are solid. If the HOA wants to hire me separately, that is their business, but it would not affect what I have already promised to you and the others." "Good," Laura said, exhaling, "because people are really stressed about this road closure. Some families are talking about renting apartments in town for the winter just to avoid the detour." "It would not come to that," I said. "One way or another, those roads will be treated." On Monday morning, I received a call from Cheryl at the HOA office. "Mr. Ellsworth, the board has reviewed your proposal and they would like to move forward. Can you come in to sign the contract?" "I will be there this afternoon," I said. When I arrived at the HOA office, Brenda was waiting for me. She looked tired, and her usual veneer of confidence seemed to have cracked. "Here is the contract," she said, sliding a document across the desk. "We have agreed to your terms." I read through the contract carefully, checking every line to make sure it matched what I had proposed. Everything looked correct, so I signed it and handed it back to Brenda. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I know this has been difficult, but I hope we can move forward professionally." "Professionally, yes," I said. "But let us be clear, Brenda, this does not erase what happened. You and the board tried to bully me out of this neighborhood for no reason. If it were not for that road closure, you would still be fining me right now." Brenda looked down at the desk, and for a moment I thought she might actually apologize, but instead she just nodded. "I understand." December 1st arrived with a light dusting of snow. The state closed County Road 428 as scheduled, and the detour route became the only way in and out of Meadowbrook Hills. The first few days were chaotic, with residents struggling to navigate the unfamiliar roads and dealing with the added travel time. I began my treatments on the first evening after the closure, driving my truck along the detour route and spraying a thin layer of salt brine onto the road surface. The process was tedious and time-consuming, but it was effective. By the time the first major snowstorm hit in mid-December, the roads were prepped and ready. The difference was stark. While other unpaved roads in the area became slick and dangerous, the detour route remained passable. Residents were able to get to work, kids made it to school, and emergency vehicles could access the neighborhood without issue. I started getting thank you notes in my mailbox. People stopped me in the grocery store to shake my hand. One elderly couple even brought me a homemade pie as a gesture of appreciation. It felt good to be recognized for my work, especially after months of being treated like a nuisance by the HOA. But not everyone was happy. In late December, I got a call from Richard, the board member who had opposed my contract from the beginning. "Grant, we need to talk," he said, his tone curt. "There have been some complaints about your truck." "What kind of complaints?" I asked, already feeling my frustration return. "Some residents are saying that you are driving too fast on the detour roads and that the salt brine is damaging their vehicles." "That is ridiculous," I said. "I drive well within the speed limits and salt brine is standard for road treatment. If people are concerned about their vehicles, they should wash them regularly, like they would after driving on any treated road in the winter." "I am just passing along what I have heard," Richard said. "The board wants to make sure you are fulfilling your contract properly." "I am fulfilling my contract exactly as agreed," I said. "If you have specific concerns, put them in writing and I will address them. But I am not going to let you invent new complaints just because you are unhappy about this arrangement." Richard hung up without another word. I shook my head, knowing that the HOA was still looking for ways to undermine me. In January, the situation escalated. A major blizzard hit Nebraska, dumping over a foot of snow across the region. The detour roads were buried, and the county's snow plows were stretched thin trying to clear the main highways. I worked around the clock, making multiple passes on the detour route to keep it accessible. One evening, as I was finishing a treatment run, I saw a car stuck in a ditch along one of the unpaved roads. I pulled over and got out to help. The driver was a young woman named Emma, and she was visibly shaken. "Thank you so much," she said as I helped her out of the car. "I hit a patch of ice and just slid right off the road." "Are you okay?" I asked. "I am fine, just scared," Emma said. "I was trying to get home to Meadowbrook Hills, but this detour is a nightmare." "Let me call a tow truck for you," I said, pulling out my phone. While we waited for the tow truck to arrive, Emma told me about her frustrations with the road closure. She was a nurse who worked night shifts at the hospital in Kearney, and the detour added an extra 40 minutes to her commute each way. "I do not know how much longer I can do this," she said. "I am exhausted and I am terrified of driving these roads in the dark." "I am doing everything I can to keep them safe," I said. "But you are right, it is not an ideal situation." When the tow truck finally arrived, I made sure Emma got home safely. The incident stuck with me, though. People were struggling, and while my treatments were helping, they were not a perfect solution. The next day, I attended another HOA board meeting. This time, there was a larger crowd of residents, all of whom were frustrated about the road closure and the ongoing inconvenience. Brenda stood at the front of the room, trying to maintain order as people shouted questions and complaints. "I understand your concerns," she said, raising her voice. "But the road closure is a state issue, not something the HOA can control." "What about the detour?" someone yelled from the back. "Why is not the county maintaining those roads? The county has said they do not have the budget to treat secondary roads during the closure," Brenda replied. "That is why we hired Mr. Ellsworth to handle it. A man in the front row stood up. And what happens when the contract runs out in February? Are we supposed to just hope the state finishes on time? The state has assured us that the project will be completed by late February, Brenda said, though her tone lacked confidence. I knew from experience that construction projects rarely finished on schedule, especially in winter. If the road closure extended into March or beyond, the HOA would have to renegotiate with me, and I was not sure they had the budget for it. After the meeting, Brenda approached me. "Grant, can I talk to you for a moment?" "Sure," I said, though I was wary of what she might want. "I just wanted to say thank you," Brenda said, and she actually sounded sincere. "I know we got off on the wrong foot, but you have really come through for this community. A lot of people are grateful for what you are doing." "I appreciate that," I said, "but I am just doing my job." "I know," Brenda said, "and I am sorry for how things went down with the violation. I was following what I thought were the rules, but I can see now that we were too rigid." It was not a full apology, but it was more than I expected. "Thanks, Brenda. I appreciate you saying that." As the winter dragged on, the detour became a fact of life for everyone in Meadowbrook Hills. My treatments kept the roads passable, but the added travel time and stress took a toll on the community. Some families did end up renting temporary housing in town, while others adjusted their schedules to minimize trips. In mid-February, the state issued an update on the road closure. The reconstruction project was behind schedule due to unexpected issues with the road's foundation. The new estimated completion date was late March, possibly early April. The announcement sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. People were furious, and the HOA was flooded with calls and emails demanding answers. Brenda called me the same day the announcement was made. "Grant, we need to extend your contract," she said, and I could hear the desperation in her voice. "I figured you might," I said. "But my rates are going to go up. March and April are busy months for me, and I will need to hire additional help to keep up with the detour roads on top of my other contracts." "How much are we talking?" Brenda asked. "Another $10,000 for March and another $10,000 if it extends into April," I said. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "That is a lot of money, Grant." "It is a lot of work," I said. "And frankly, Brenda, I am the only option you have. If you do not want to pay my rates, you are welcome to try finding someone else." Brenda sighed. "I will talk to the board, but I think we are going to have to agree." The board approved the extended contract, though it was clear they were not happy about it. The HOA's reserve funds were being drained, and some residents were starting to complain about the potential for a special assessment to cover the costs. In early March, things took a strange turn. I received a call from a man named Kevin who lived in Meadowbrook Hills. He was not one of my clients, and I had never spoken to him before. "Grant, I wanted to give you a heads up," Kevin said. "I overheard Brenda and Richard talking at the community center yesterday. They were discussing ways to get out of paying you for the extended contract." "What do you mean?" I asked, feeling a knot form in my stomach. "I do not know the details, but it sounded like they were looking for some kind of loophole or technicality," Kevin said. "I thought you should know." I thanked Kevin for the warning and immediately called Tom Martinez. I explained the situation, and he advised me to document everything and to make sure I had proof of every treatment I performed on the detour roads. "If they try to claim you breached the contract, you need to be able to prove otherwise," Tom said. I started taking photos and videos of every treatment run, timestamping them and saving them to a cloud storage account. I also kept detailed logs of my hours and expenses. If the HOA wanted to play games, I was going to be ready. Sure enough, in late March, I received a letter from the HOA's lawyer. The letter claimed that I had failed to meet the terms of the contract by not treating the roads on certain dates, and that the HOA was withholding the final payment until the issue was resolved. I read the letter in disbelief. The dates they mentioned were days when the weather had been clear and dry, with no snow or ice. I had made a professional judgment not to treat the roads on those days because it was not necessary. My contract specified that I would treat the roads as needed based on weather conditions, not that I would treat them on a rigid schedule regardless of necessity. I forwarded the letter to Tom, who immediately recognized it for what it was. "They are trying to cheat you out of the money," he said. "But they do not have a case. Your contract gives you discretion over when treatments are needed, and your logs show that you were out there consistently during actual weather events." "So what do I do?" I asked. "We respond with your documentation and demand full payment," Tom said. "If they refuse, we file a lawsuit. And honestly, Grant, I think we can also go after them for breach of contract and bad faith dealing. This is a pretty clear-cut case." Tom drafted a response letter, and I sent it to the HOA along with copies of my logs, photos, and videos. The letter made it clear that I had fulfilled my obligations and that any attempt to withhold payment would result in legal action. 2 weeks later, I received a check for the full amount owed. There was no apology, no explanation, just the payment. I deposited the check and felt a sense of relief, but I also knew that my relationship with the HOA was beyond repair. In mid-April, the state finally finished the road reconstruction, and County Road 428 reopened. The detour was no longer necessary, and life in Meadowbrook Hills slowly returned to normal. My contract with the HOA ended, and I went back to focusing on my regular snow removal clients, but the story was not over yet. In early May, I got a call from Laura, the resident who had been one of my first clients during the detour. "Grant, you need to see this," she said, her voice urgent. "There is something going on with the HOA finances." "What do you mean?" I asked. "A group of us requested copies of the HOA's financial records, and there are some serious discrepancies," Laura said. "It looks like Brenda and Richard have been mismanaging funds for years. The money they paid you for the road treatments, that was supposed to come from the reserve fund, but it looks like they had been dipping into that fund for personal expenses long before the road closure." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious," Laura said. "We are talking about tens of thousands of dollars that are unaccounted for. We are putting together a formal complaint, and we think this might involve fraud." Over the next few weeks, the situation exploded. A group of residents, led by Laura, hired an independent accountant to audit the HOA's finances. The audit revealed that Brenda and Richard had been embezzling money from the reserve fund for over 3 years. They had used HOA funds to pay for personal vacations, home renovations, and even luxury items like jewelry and electronics. The total amount stolen was over $80,000. The residents called an emergency meeting, and the community center was packed. People were furious, and there were calls for Brenda and Richard to resign immediately. When Brenda tried to defend herself, claiming that the expenses were legitimate and related to HOA business, she was shouted down. "You stole from us," one resident yelled. "You took our money and used it for yourself while we were struggling to pay for road treatments and dealing with that nightmare detour." The meeting ended with a unanimous vote to remove Brenda and Richard from the board, but the residents did not stop there. Laura and several others filed a formal complaint with the Kearney Police Department, and an investigation was launched. I was called in to give a statement about my interactions with the HOA. I explained the situation with the fines, the contract negotiations, and the attempt to withhold my final payment. The detective taking my statement seemed particularly interested in the letter from the HOA's lawyer. "It sounds like they were trying to keep as much money as possible to cover up the missing funds," the detective said. "Your case might actually help establish a pattern of behavior." In late June, Brenda Morrison and Richard Turner were arrested and charged with embezzlement and fraud. The news spread through Meadowbrook Hills like wildfire. People were shocked, angry, and relieved all at once. For years, Brenda had ruled the HOA with an iron fist, and now her reign was over. The criminal trial took place in early September. I attended as a witness, along with several other residents. The evidence against Brenda and Richard was overwhelming. The prosecution presented bank records, receipts, and testimony from the accountant who had conducted the audit. Brenda's lawyer tried to argue that the expenses were justified and that there had been a misunderstanding, but the jury did not buy it. After 3 days of testimony, they returned a guilty verdict on all counts. Brenda was sentenced to 5 years in prison, while Richard received 3 years. They were also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, though it was unclear how much of the stolen money could actually be recovered. As I sat in the courtroom and watched the judge hand down the sentences, I felt a sense of closure. The HOA had tried to make my life miserable over a petty violation, and in the end, their own corruption had brought them down. After the trial, I went back to running my snow removal business. The next winter was busy, and I signed contracts with even more clients in Meadowbrook Hills. The new HOA board, led by Laura, was far more reasonable and focused on actually serving the community rather than micromanaging every detail of people's lives. One evening in December, I was sitting in my living room with Max when I got a knock on the door. I opened it to find Laura standing there with a small gift bag. "Hey, Grant," she said, smiling. "I just wanted to stop by and say thank you for everything." "You do not have to thank me," I said. "I was just doing my job." "You did a lot more than that," Laura said. "You stood up to Brenda when the rest of us were too scared, and when the neighborhood needed help, you came through. We are lucky to have you here." She handed me the gift bag, and I opened it to find a custom-made ornament with a tiny salt brine sprayer engraved on it. I laughed and shook my head. "This is perfect," I said. "Thank you, Laura." As she left, I hung the ornament on my Christmas tree and looked around my living room. Max was snoring softly in his bed, and outside, snow was beginning to fall. I thought about everything that had happened over the past year: the fines, the road closure, the contracts, the trial. It had been one of the hardest years of my life, but it had also been one of the most rewarding. I had learned that standing up for what is right is not always easy, but it is always worth it. And I had learned that sometimes the people who try to tear you down end up destroying themselves in the process. I poured myself a drink and sat down on the couch, feeling content. The salt brine sprayer that had caused so much trouble was still attached to my truck, parked proudly in my driveway. And this time, no one was going to tell me to move it. The following spring brought another twist I had not anticipated. The story of Brenda Morrison's embezzlement had made its way into the local news, and a reporter from the Kearney Hub reached out to interview me. At first, I was hesitant. I did not want to relive the drama or seem like I was gloating over someone else's downfall. But the reporter, a woman named Jennifer, convinced me that my story was about more than just one corrupt HOA president. "This is about how regular people can stand up to institutional bullying," Jennifer said over the phone. "A lot of homeowners feel powerless when dealing with their HOAs. Your story shows that it is possible to fight back." I agreed to the interview, and Jennifer came to my house on a sunny Saturday morning. We sat on my back deck, and she asked me to walk her through everything that had happened, from the first violation notice to the trial. I tried to be as honest and straightforward as possible, though I made sure to stick to the facts and not embellish anything. The article came out the following week, and the response was overwhelming. I received emails and phone calls from people all over Nebraska, and even from other states, who had similar experiences with their HOAs. Some wanted advice, others just wanted to share their own stories, and a few were dealing with ongoing disputes and wondering if they should take legal action. One call stood out in particular. It was from a man named Gerald in Omaha, who was being fined by his HOA for having a wheelchair ramp installed on his front porch. The HOA claimed the ramp was not aesthetically consistent with the neighborhood, despite the fact that Gerald's wife needed it for mobility after a stroke. "I read your article, and it gave me hope," Gerald said. "I have been fighting with these people for months, and I was about to just give up and sell my house. But maybe I can win this." I gave Gerald the contact information for Tom Martinez and encouraged him to keep fighting. A few months later, Gerald called me back to let me know that his case had been resolved in his favor. The HOA had backed down after his lawyer threatened to file a discrimination lawsuit under the Fair Housing Act. "I cannot thank you enough," Gerald said. "If I had not read your story, I would not have known that I had options." Hearing stories like Gerald's made me realize that what I had gone through was not just about me. It was part of a larger pattern of HOA overreach that affects thousands of people across the country. I started thinking about ways I could help others who were dealing with similar issues. In the fall, I was invited to speak at a local community forum about HOA governance. The event was organized by a group of residents from various neighborhoods in Kearney who were frustrated with their HOAs and wanted to learn more about their rights. I was nervous about public speaking, but I felt like it was important to share what I had learned. The forum was held in a high school auditorium, and I was surprised by how many people showed up. There had to be at least 200 people in the audience, all of whom looked engaged and eager to hear what I had to say. I stood at the podium and told my story, focusing on the key lessons I had learned. I talked about the importance of reading and understanding your HOA's covenants, documenting everything, and not being afraid to stand up for yourself. I also emphasized the value of working with a good lawyer who understands HOA law. "These organizations have a lot of power," I said, "but they are not above the law. If your HOA is violating its own rules or acting in bad faith, you have the right to challenge them. Do not let them bully you into submission." After my talk, several people came up to thank me and ask questions. One woman told me that her HOA had fined her for planting flowers in her front yard without prior approval. Another man said his HOA was trying to foreclose on his house over unpaid fines that he believed were unjustified. I gave out Tom Martinez's contact information to anyone who needed legal help, and I encouraged people to band together with their neighbors when dealing with HOA disputes. There is strength in numbers, and HOAs are less likely to push back when they are facing organized resistance from multiple residents. As the months went by, I continued to run my snow removal business, but I also became more involved in HOA advocacy. I started a blog where I shared tips and resources for homeowners dealing with difficult HOAs, and I connected with other advocates around the country who were working on similar issues. In the winter of the following year, Meadowbrook Hills faced another challenge. The new HOA board, led by Laura, discovered that the community's infrastructure was in worse shape than anyone had realized. The roads within the neighborhood needed resurfacing, the storm drains were clogged, and the community center required major repairs. The cost of addressing these issues was going to be significant, and the HOA's reserve fund was still depleted from Brenda's embezzlement. Laura called me to ask for advice. "We are looking at a special assessment of at least $2,000 per household," she said. "People are already upset about what happened with Brenda, and now we are asking them to pay even more money. I do not know how to handle this." "You need to be transparent," I said. "Show people exactly where the money is going and why these repairs are necessary. If they understand that this is about maintaining the value and safety of their homes, they will be more willing to support it." Laura took my advice, and the new board held a series of town hall meetings to explain the situation. They brought in engineers and contractors to present detailed reports on the condition of the infrastructure, and they showed residents a clear plan for how the money would be spent. It was not an easy sell, but the residents ultimately approved the special assessment. They trusted the new board in a way they had never trusted Brenda, and that trust made all the difference. As the repairs got underway, I reflected on how much had changed in Meadowbrook Hills over the past 2 years. The neighborhood had gone from being ruled by a corrupt and authoritarian HOA to having a board that actually listened to its residents. People were more engaged, more informed, and more willing to hold their leaders accountable. And as for me, I had gone from being the guy who was fined for having a salt brine sprayer on his truck to being someone who helped change the culture of an entire community. It was not something I had set out to do, but I was proud of the role I had played. One afternoon in early spring, I was out working on my truck in the driveway when a car pulled up. A young couple got out and the man walked over to me with a friendly smile. "Are you Grant Ellsworth?" he asked. "That is me," I said, wiping grease off my hands. "We just moved into the neighborhood," the man said. "We heard about everything that happened here and we wanted to meet you. My name is Jason, and this is my wife, Karen." I shook their hands, trying not to react to the woman's name. After everything I had been through with Brenda, the name Karen had taken on a whole new meaning for me. "Welcome to Meadowbrook Hills," I said. "I hope you will be happy here." "We already are," Jason said. "We love the community and we are really impressed with how involved everyone is." "It feels like a real neighborhood, you know." "It does now," I said. "It was not always like that." Karen smiled. "We read the article about you in the Kearney Hub. What you did was really brave." "I just stood up for myself," I said. "Anyone would have done the same thing." "I do not think that is true," Jason said. "A lot of people would have just backed down and moved. You stayed and fought and you made a difference." After they left, I went back to working on my truck, but their words stuck with me. I had never thought of myself as particularly brave. I was just a guy who ran a small business and wanted to be left alone to do my job. But maybe that is what bravery is, sometimes refusing to let someone push you around, even when it would be easier to just give in. That summer, I got an unexpected phone call from the Nebraska state legislature. A representative named Senator Patricia Green was working on a bill to reform HOA laws in the state, and she wanted to speak with me about my experiences. "Your story has gotten a lot of attention," Senator Green said, "and it has highlighted some serious issues with how HOAs operate in Nebraska. I am working on legislation that would increase transparency, limit the amount of fines HOAs can impose, and give homeowners more recourse when they believe they have been treated unfairly." I was thrilled to hear that someone in the state government was taking these issues seriously. I agreed to testify at a legislative hearing, and in August, I traveled to Lincoln to speak before the Judiciary Committee. The hearing room was packed with people on both sides of the issue. Some were homeowners like me who had been mistreated by their HOAs. Others were HOA board members and property managers who argued that the proposed reforms would make it too difficult for HOAs to enforce their rules. When it was my turn to speak, I stood at the microphone and told my story once again. I described the fines, the road closure, the embezzlement, and the trial. I explained how the existing laws had made it difficult for me to fight back, and how the proposed reforms could help other homeowners in similar situations. HOAs serve an important purpose, I said, but they need to be held accountable. Right now, there are too many opportunities for abuse, and homeowners have too few options for recourse. This bill would help balance the scales. The committee members asked me several questions, and I did my best to answer them honestly. When the hearing was over, Senator Green thanked me for my testimony and told me that she was optimistic about the bill's chances of passing. In the fall, the bill was brought to the floor of the state legislature for a vote. I watched the proceedings online, holding my breath as the votes were tallied. In the end, the bill passed with bipartisan support, and the governor signed it into law a few weeks later. The new law included several key provisions. It required HOAs to provide detailed financial disclosures to their members on an annual basis. It capped the amount of fines HOAs could impose for minor violations, and it established a formal process for homeowners to appeal HOA decisions without having to go through expensive litigation. I felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that my experience had contributed to real, meaningful change. The law was not perfect, and it would not solve every problem with HOAs, but it was a step in the right direction. As the years went by, life in Meadowbrook Hills continued to improve. The infrastructure repairs were completed, and the neighborhood looked better than ever. The new HOA board remained focused on serving the community rather than micromanaging it, and residents felt more empowered and engaged. I continued to run my snow removal business, and every winter, I treated the roads in Meadowbrook Hills and several other neighborhoods in the area. My salt brine sprayer, the piece of equipment that had caused so much trouble, became a symbol of resilience and perseverance. People in the neighborhood would wave when they saw me driving by, and more than once, someone stopped me to thank me for everything I had done. One winter evening, I was sitting in my living room with Max when I got a text from Laura. It was a photo of the community center, decorated with lights and a banner that read, "Thank you, Grant, for keeping us safe." I smiled and texted back, "You guys did not have to do that." Laura replied, "Yes, we did. You are part of this community and we appreciate you." I looked out the window at my truck parked in the driveway, the salt brine sprayer gleaming under the streetlights. It had been a long and difficult journey, but I would not change a thing. I had stood up for myself, helped my community, and made a lasting impact on the laws that govern HOAs in Nebraska. As I sat there with Max beside me, I felt a deep sense of peace. I had proven that one person can make a difference, even when the odds seem stacked against them. And I had learned that the most important thing you can do in life is to stand up for what is right, no matter how hard it gets. That lesson, more than anything else, was worth all the struggle.